Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'm 44 years old, male, and have been married for 10 years. My wife is 41, and we've been together for 13 years. We also have an 8-year-old son, and overall, we're quite happy with our lives. However, this isn't my first marriage. I got married at 22, but unfortunately, that marriage ended in divorce within 3 years for reasons that I'm still not fully aware of. My first wife, whom I'll call Kathy, yes, I know it is always a Kathy, just live with it. She was with me since middle school. We were basically childhood sweethearts. After graduating college and landing decent jobs, we decided to get married. Things were fine for the first couple of years, but then, for some reason, things started to feel off between us. I tried my best to keep the spark alive, but it seemed like she lost interest. No matter what I did, it felt like I was fighting a losing battle. A couple of weeks before our third anniversary, Kathy handed me divorce papers and told me she was done. I wanted to work on our marriage. I just needed one reason why we had to give up after so long. But she couldn't give me any answers beyond saying she just wasn't in love with me anymore. I was devastated but felt powerless to change her mind. Ultimately, I decided to go through with the divorce because I didn't want to be with her anymore, and dragging the process would only cause me more harm. It was one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make. But I knew I had to accept her choice, even if it left me heartbroken. After the divorce, things went relatively smoothly since we didn't have many joint assets, making the process straightforward. However, once it was finalized, I didn't see Amy again. I heard from a couple of friends that she moved to a different city and cut off contact with everyone, which was understandable given the circumstances. What struck me as really strange, though, was how my family reacted. Instead of being supportive during such a difficult time, they began distancing themselves from me around the same time as the divorce. It was confusing and hurtful. I thought they would be there for me. I tried to keep in touch, but I soon realized I had been blocked on social media and other platforms. In a couple of attempts to reach out, I even went to visit them, but neither my parents nor my sister would answer the door. It was a lonely and isolating experience, especially since I was already struggling with my emotions post-divorce. For a couple of years, I found it hard to motivate myself and ended up quitting my job, spending several months unemployed and lost. Despite the pain, I was incredibly lucky to have friends who stood by me. They encouraged me to focus on self-improvement and motivated me to move on. Their support helped me navigate through that dark period and begin to rebuild my life. After the divorce, my family was never really there for me, so my friends stepped up and took care of me during that tough time. Their support was invaluable, and it inspired me to pursue a long-held dream of mine, opening my own restaurant. Throughout my marriage to Kathy, I had always pushed this dream aside to save money and think about our future together. But now that I was on my own, I felt it was time to make it happen. With the help of my friends, I reached out to a couple of investors who were willing to back my vision. I used the name that my parents had suggested for the restaurant, creating a personal connection to my family while also forging my own path. It took a lot of hard work and perseverance, but within a few years, I was able to open my first restaurant. It took nearly 4 years after the divorce for me to truly get back on my feet, and 2 years after that, I met my wife. We connected through mutual friends at a party, and she mentioned how much she loved my restaurant. That sparked our conversation, and we hit it off. After 3 years of dating, I decided to give love another chance and asked her to marry me. Now, 10 years later, we have a wonderful life together, along with our 8-year-old son. Looking back, I can see how far I've come since those difficult days, and I feel grateful for the support and love I've found along the way. It's not just my personal life that has improved over the past couple of years. My professional life has also taken a significant turn for the better. It all began with my restaurant, which became successful enough that we slowly started to expand. Thanks to that initial success, I'm now the CEO of my own hospitality group, and we own a semi-popular chain of restaurants and hotels. We're currently planning to expand beyond the state, aiming for greater recognition and success. It's been an uphill battle, but I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. So, when I was invited to sit for an interview recently, I felt it was a sign that I had truly made it. I agreed to the interview, thinking it would just be a good opportunity to share my journey and maybe inspire others. However, I had no idea that this would lead to such a storm in my life. After the interview aired on a moderately popular news channel, my family decided to reach out to me. I was surprised because, after all this time, I didn't expect them to come back into my life, especially not after they had distanced themselves so completely following my divorce. To my shock, just 3 days ago, they showed up at my office unannounced. When the receptionist informed me that my family was waiting outside, I initially thought it was my wife and son. It would have been odd since my wife was at work and my son was at school, but I was ready to embrace them. Then the receptionist clarified that it was my parents and sister who were there. Seeing them after so long was an overwhelming experience. I had so many mixed emotions: surprise, confusion, and even a hint of anger at their sudden reappearance after years of silence. I wasn't sure how to handle the situation, especially since they had chosen to come to my workplace, where I was in the middle of a busy day. It felt inappropriate for them to demand my time when I was focused on my business. I had built a new life for myself, and their unexpected visit stirred up a lot of old feelings and questions. What could they possibly want after all this time? It was then that I started finding it difficult to process what was going on. I told the receptionist to inform my family that I would see them later, but for now, they needed to leave. Of course, they didn't take that well and began throwing a tantrum. I didn't want security to throw them out before I had a chance to speak with them, so I reluctantly went to meet them in the lobby. As soon as they saw me, it was as if nothing had changed since the last time we were together, nearly 20 years ago. They started fawning over me, showering me with compliments about how great it was that I had become successful enough to make it onto the news. They described my story as inspiring, which felt surreal. After all this time, they were suddenly acting like they had always been supportive, even though they had distanced themselves when I needed them most. I tried to brush it off, insisting that I had to get back to work, but then they brought up my family. During my interview, I had shared a bit about my wife and son, highlighting how crucial they had been in my journey. I must admit, it felt strange to have them mention this part of my life. These were moments they hadn't been a part of, yet they were now eager to connect with it. They started expressing a desire to meet my wife and their grandson, claiming they had spent too long away from us. Hearing that made my heart race. Part of me was curious about what they wanted, but another part felt defensive. At that point, they started telling me that I hadn't put in enough effort to get in touch with them after the divorce and that I should have tried harder. This caught me off guard, but I realized that I might finally be able to get some clarity about what had happened back then. I decided to let them talk instead of dismissing them, even taking a seat in the lobby with them so I could get to the bottom of things and hopefully find some closure. As they spoke, I uncovered the real reason why Kathy had decided to divorce me and why my family had distanced themselves from me during that time. I know you might have figured it out already, but yes, Kathy had been cheating on me. I had never had a clue, and to my shock, my parents had been helping to cover it up all along. Now, I know that might seem harsh, but my parents had their reasons. At least, according to them, these were valid reasons to help their daughter-in-law cheat on their son. Apparently, the person Kathy was having an affair with was my cousin, my dad's brother's son. It was a devastating revelation that explained so much about the years of confusion and heartbreak I had experienced. My mind raced as I processed this information. All those times I had been left in the dark, grappling with feelings of betrayal and abandonment, were now being unraveled. My family's actions made a sickening kind of sense now, and I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could they betray me like that? And how could Kathy, someone I thought I knew so well, have done this to me? It was hard to reconcile their claims of being supportive with the reality of their actions. When they finally told me all of that, everything seemed to fall into place almost immediately. It made sense why they had helped her, why I hadn't been invited to any family events for the past 20 years, and why I had been completely cast aside for no fault of my own. My cousin, let's call him Carl, was a spoiled, entitled brat, and I had always disliked him. Unfortunately, because his mother had passed away when he was just 6 months old, my family seemed to think he deserved a free pass for everything he did. Throughout his life, nobody had bothered to teach him how to behave, and he always got away with everything. It didn't help that my uncle was my dad's boss since he had started the family business and my dad had joined him later. After my marriage, when Carl decided he wanted to be with Kathy and she was on board with it too, my family felt they had no choice but to help them out. They couldn't risk my uncle's anger, and putting their relationship with me at risk was an easily justifiable sacrifice in their eyes. They explained that after the divorce, my uncle made it very clear that he didn't want anyone in the family to have any contact with me at all, including my parents and sister. It felt like a dagger to my heart, realizing that the people who were supposed to support me had chosen to protect someone who had hurt me deeply instead. I was left feeling completely betrayed, not just by Kathy, but by the family I had always thought would stand by me. Apparently, my family had tried to protest when Kathy first started pulling away from me, but then she announced that she was pregnant with my child. That was the turning point. They felt they had no choice but to cut ties with me if they ever wanted to have any relationship with their grandkid. It's hard to believe that I was never notified about Kathy's pregnancy when she filed for divorce. She had moved out long before it was finalized. so I had no clue that I had become a father long before my son was born. To add to the shock, I learned that I have a daughter who is almost 20 now, and she has never even known me. She thinks Carl is her real father. The enormity of this revelation was overwhelming. It felt surreal, like I was being told a story rather than receiving the reality of my life. I had spent years trying to understand the pain of my past, only to find out that my family had essentially cut me off in favor of having a relationship with their grandchild and, in their minds, maintaining job security. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. They had made a cowardly choice, prioritizing their own comfort over standing by me during a tumultuous time in my life. All those years of silence, isolation, and questioning my worth, only to learn that it was all because they wanted to protect their own interests. They could have easily approached me with the truth and allowed me to deal with the situation, but instead, they chose to let fear of my dad's brother dictate their actions, as if he could do any real harm beyond firing my father from the business. Even in that case, my dad could have retaliated with a lawsuit. As for not telling me about Kathy's pregnancy and the fact that I have a daughter, I can't fathom any justification for that. For 20 years, they kept this secret and never spoke up until they discovered I was doing well in life. Suddenly, they were filled with remorse and wanted to make amends. Unfortunately for them, I saw right through their act. Once they finished telling me everything, I told them I needed them to leave because, at that moment, I couldn't find it in my heart to forgive them. I tried to remain civil since we were in the lobby of my workplace and I didn't want to cause a scene, but I couldn't expect them to behave similarly. When I expressed my desire for them to leave, they immediately started whining, insisting that I needed to consider where they were coming from and how difficult the situation had been for them as well. I told them I knew for a fact that they were reaching out to me now solely because I had found success and they wanted a piece of it. They vehemently denied it, with my sister even going so far as to claim that I owed my success to them. By that, she clearly meant that I had used the name they suggested for my restaurant back when it was just a dream. I found it incredibly bold for her to make such a claim, especially considering I hadn't received any of their support over the years. I had built everything on my own, with help from my friends, not them. Merely suggesting a name didn't give them the right to take credit for my achievements, and it was such a ridiculous notion that I ended up laughing at her. I told her that if she and my parents didn't leave immediately, I would have them forcibly removed from the building. They immediately started arguing, insisting they weren't going anywhere until we cleared the air. But honestly, I wasn't interested in that. So I followed through with my threat and had them thrown out by security. They were naturally upset during the ejection, trying to tell me they had no choice in this matter, but I didn't buy it. They definitely had a choice. They just made the wrong one, and now they have to face the consequences. It hasn't been difficult for them to go without seeing me and my family for the past 20 years, so I'm sure they can manage the future just fine as well. Anyway, it's been 3 days since that confrontation, and they haven't stopped trying to reach me. They've been texting me on social media, sending emails to my work address, and even showing up at my office, though they haven't had the nerve to come inside again. There's been a noticeable shift in their attitude. Now, all their messages are filled with apologies. Even when I see them waiting outside my workplace, they look genuinely upset and hopeful for a chance to talk, but I just drive by and ignore them. To be honest, it's reached a point where I almost feel a bit sorry for them. I've discussed this with my wife because, regardless of what I decide to do about my family, we still need to think about my daughter, whom I didn't even know existed until a few days ago. We've been going back and forth on whether we should try to trace my daughter and reach out to her. On top of that, my family hasn't given up. I doubt they'll go anywhere until they get another chance to speak with me. My wife thinks it might be worth it to invite them over and try to clear the air. She believes that addressing the toxicity could be beneficial for my emotional health. However, I have no interest in doing anything like that. I just want to continue ignoring them until they go away on their own. I simply don't have the capacity to deal with them right now, especially with everything I've recently learned. So, we're struggling to figure out how to handle this situation. I want to ask if it's unreasonable for me not to want to give my parents a chance to speak to me after 20 years of no contact. It's been a week and 3 days since I posted, and my wife and I have decided to continue ignoring my family. Thankfully, they haven't shown up at my workplace for the past couple of days. Maybe they've finally gotten tired of it or felt intimidated by security, but whatever the reason, I'm relieved. Once they stopped showing up, it became much easier for me to stop thinking about them. I guess it was just their presence that was making me feel guilty about my choices. However, I no longer feel guilty about ignoring their messages. They can keep apologizing all they want, but it won't change anything. The truth is, they've failed me as a family, and no amount of apologies can make that right again. They continue to send messages from various accounts and email addresses, but I'm not even bothering to block them anymore. What's the point? They'll just create new ones to try to reach out to me, and I'll keep ignoring it all. Let's see how long they can keep this up and how sincere their apologies really are. Now, onto the other issue my wife and I are dealing with, our daughter. We have her full name and know where she goes to college since my parents mentioned it during our conversation. My assistant even managed to find her social media accounts for me, but so far, I haven't taken any action. I'm unsure whether it's appropriate to reach out or how to tell her that I'm her biological father. The whole situation feels overwhelming, and I want to approach it the right way. Since she's not a minor, I can't just show up at Kathy's house demanding custody or anything like that. Honestly, I'd prefer to keep her out of this mess entirely, especially after everything I've discovered about Kathy and my family. I've lost all respect for them. They're just a bunch of spineless cowards. However, I can't say the same about my daughter. No matter who raised her, she's still my flesh and blood. So finally, my wife and I decided to go for it. There was no point in waiting for the perfect moment to reach out to my daughter. We just needed to rip off the Band-Aid. Since she lives in a different state, we figured it wouldn't be right to fly out to her. So we decided to send her a message first and see how she responds. We reached out to her on Instagram and explained everything as gently as we could. Now, we're just waiting for her reply. I'm sure it's going to be really complicated to come to terms with everything. It's complicated for me as well, and I can't even grasp how my wife has managed to be so supportive while I reach out to the daughter I never knew I had with my ex-wife. I'm certain there are a lot of mixed emotions for all of us, but we're doing our best. I genuinely hope my daughter responds because I would love to build a relationship with her. As for my parents, they haven't shown up at my workplace in a while. Yesterday, they sent me a lengthy email expressing their remorse about everything and their genuine desire to repair our relationship. They asked for one chance and mentioned they wouldn't reach out again. Instead, they'd wait for me to contact them. Honestly, I'm relieved they've taken the hint and realized that I'm not ready to speak with them right now. I have enough on my plate already, and the last thing I need is for them to stir up more drama. I'm just hoping they stick to what they said and don't reach out to me again. If I feel ready or want to speak with them at any point, I'll do so myself. However, right now, it seems very unlikely that will happen anytime soon. Knowing the real reason they hadn't spoken to me in 20 years has made things much worse. I feel betrayed and hurt, and I doubt those feelings will fade anytime soon. At least one good thing came from this. I discovered I have a daughter, and I really hope she decides to give our relationship a chance. I haven't told my son yet, just in case she doesn't want to talk to us. I wouldn't want to give him false hope. But if things go well, he might find a sister in her, and I could get to know the daughter I never knew I had. I'm just overwhelmed with emotions right now, trying hard to keep it all together. So almost 2 weeks ago, I reached out to my daughter on social media and sent her a message explaining everything about who I am and how we're related. After waiting for 2 weeks, I finally got a text back today. She didn't say much, just that she spoke to her mother about me after my message and found out that I'm her biological father. Obviously, this must have come as a shock to her because for the past 20 years, she believed that Carl was her biological father and had no idea she wasn't his daughter. She also learned the real story about how her mother and I ended up in this situation, and she told me that she would like to meet me and my family. So, we're all flying out to see her this weekend since she isn't speaking to her family right now and doesn't have the funds to come see us. She didn't go into detail, but when she confronted Kathy about my message, Kathy initially tried to deny it. Eventually, she was forced to tell her the truth. I haven't heard from Kathy yet, and I really hope she doesn't contact me because I don't want to speak to her. Unfortunately, my family broke their promise immediately and started trying to talk to me as soon as they learned I had reached out to my daughter. Apparently, my uncle was furious that I found out about the situation. Naturally, he has reason to be upset since they spent 20 years trying to ensure I never discovered the truth, fearing I would cause trouble in their lives. Now that I finally know, my uncle is holding my parents accountable for everything. To complicate matters, my dad no longer works for my uncle, as he is now independent, yet he seems terrified of his older brother. He has been begging me to tell my uncle or Carl, or anyone else, that they had nothing to do with this and that I discovered the truth on my own. Somehow, even if I did tell my family that I found out on my own, I think it's highly unlikely anyone would believe it. They're the only ones who would do something like this, and since I haven't been close to most of my family and they haven't bothered to speak to me in the past 20 years, it's funny how desperate they're acting right now just to maintain their relationship with my uncle. But honestly, I don't really care. It was because of them that I didn't have a relationship with my daughter for 20 years, so I think this is really the least they can do. My family and I finally met my daughter. It was weird at first, then really emotional, but mostly it was just beautiful. She seems to be a genuinely kind and good person, which is surprising considering she was raised by two of the cruelest and most horrible people I know. But I guess they did a decent job raising her, or maybe it's just her own innate nature. Regardless, she seems to be really intelligent and mature. We had a long chat about how things were going with Kathy and her father. She told me that, naturally, they weren't on board with her meeting us, but she didn't care. After finding out the truth, she realized she simply didn't care what her parents thought. They haven't had any other children after her, so she doesn't think she'll abandon them forever, but she's definitely planning to distance herself from them for a while to process everything. She mentioned that she needs some time to start building a relationship with me as well, and I completely understand where she's coming from. Overall, we had a really nice time together, and she seemed to get along well with my wife and her half-brother. We had dinner, during which she revealed that my parents, her grandparents, had been in touch with her all along. She always found it strange how emotional they were about her, considering they weren't her actual grandparents. Now it all makes sense why they were so attached to her. However, after everything she's discovered, she sees all of them in a different light, and so do I. I can completely understand how she feels. Well, maybe not entirely since I'm much older, and she's just 20, but I can't imagine it's a lot harder for her. She's been lied to her entire life by the people she thought were the closest to her, and that must be incredibly difficult to reconcile. Both of us are going to have to work on this, and I'm hopeful that the future will be better. I know it has to be because we're committed to making it the best it can be. What truly brings me joy is that the meeting went well, and my family seems to be content with everything that has happened, as do I. I feel quite at peace with the situation, regardless of what my family or Kathy and Carl have done. What matters most is that after so many years, we finally have a chance to make things right, and I'm determined to make the most of that opportunity. As I left work that evening, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had just met my daughter, and we had begun to bridge the chasm created by years of lies. But that calm was shattered when I spotted my uncle and Carl waiting for me in the parking lot, their faces twisted in anger. "What do you think you're doing, playing family with her?" My uncle spat, venom dripping from his words. "You're nothing to her, just a biological accident." Carl stepped forward, fists clenched and ready to fight. "You don't get to waltz back into her life after all these years. Stay away from her, or you'll regret it." I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me. "You think you can intimidate me? You've already destroyed enough lives. I'm not afraid of you." In a heartbeat, the confrontation escalated. I lunged at Carl, throwing a punch that connected hard with his jaw, sending him staggering back. My uncle charged me, but I sidestepped and delivered a swift kick that sent him crashing into a parked car. What followed was a brutal exchange. I fought like a man possessed, driven by years of pent-up frustration. Each punch I landed was a release, a cathartic explosion of anger and hurt. I could see the shock on their faces as I unleashed everything I had. In mere moments, they were on the ground, gasping for breath. The sight of them, bruised and defeated, felt like justice for all the years of betrayal they had inflicted upon me. I stood over them, my chest heaving with adrenaline. "Consider this a warning," I said, my voice low and steady. "Stay out of my life, and stay away from my daughter. She deserves better than the lies you've fed her." Just as the weight of my anger began to lift, I heard sirens approaching. I turned to see the police arriving, summoned by onlookers who witnessed the scene. I stood there, still buzzing from the fight, as they handcuffed my uncle and Carl, their faces a mix of humiliation and fury. They were charged with trespassing and criminal intimidation, their threats now a joke. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone to call my parents. I knew I needed to make my boundaries clear. "Stay away from me and my family. You've done enough damage. I'm cutting ties with all of you. This is the last time I'll ask." I hung up feeling a strange mix of relief and finality. I wouldn't let them hurt me any longer. Meanwhile, my daughter was making her own choices. After hearing the full story of the deception and manipulation from her adoptive family, she decided to cut ties with them, too. "I don't need them in my life anymore," she told me, her voice steady and resolute. "They lied to me for so long. I want to start fresh with you and your family." In that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had fought for something real and meaningful, and now we had a chance to build a future together, free from the shadows of betrayal. Together, we would forge a new path, and this time, we wouldn't look back. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.